Welcome back to First Things First. Chris Mannix is with us. Chris, this morning,
what up, man?
Nick comes into the morning meeting, and there's always one thing he likes to brag about, if it was a workout or a big meal or something. And this morning, it was you. He got to be on your podcast yesterday.
Yes.
It was the highlight of his day. He beamed from ear to ear talking about it.
We just can't spend enough time together.
Is that what it is?
It's one of those things.
It was a ton of fun. It'll post right after the show.
Yes.
People can check it out.
Excellent.
It may have already posted, but I'm telling people it posts after the show.
Check out.
There you
go.
All right, Chris, you know, when the Oklahoma City Thunder team was first put together this offseason, expectations were high. How could they not win with Russ and PG3 and Melo? And then came a long, head-scratching season of moderate disappointment. And then last night, they clinched a playoff spot with a win over the Heat. In fact, a win on Wednesday, and they clinched a top 6 seed in the West. So which Thunder team is heading to the playoffs? No one really knows. Chris Mannix, how dangerous are the Thunder to those two big teams in the West, the Rockets and the Warriors?
I tell you what, I was rooting pretty hard for the Heat last night because nobody wanted the 2-7 matchup with Oklahoma City and Golden State more than I did, because that would have been the most intriguing and fascinating first-round matchup. That being said, Oklahoma City is by far and away the most dangerous team in the bottom half of the playoff bracket. I mean, to some degree, they've underachieved offensively this year. If they can get it together, they're as dangerous as they get. They're far more dangerous, though, in my opinion, to Golden State than they are to Houston, just because of the natural hatred factor that exists between Oklahoma City and the Golden State Warriors, plus the matchups there. You know,
Yes.
Steph Curry, what does he look like when he comes back? Is it going to be Quinn Cook versus Russell Westbrook? Paul George, even though they missed something with Andre Roberson out of the lineup, he can defend Kevin Durant at a decent level. If you look at the numbers for Oklahoma City, they're pretty good against Golden State. That's the matchup I'd love to see in the second round, and the most dangerous one for Golden State.
And just to clarify, in case people don't understand why Mannix was rooting for Miami last night, if Miami had beaten Oklahoma City last night, then we would be in line for that 2-7 matchup. Now, the only way we get OKC Golden State in the first round is if OKC loses to a terrible Memphis
we're just assuming that the Grizzlies
and some other help. So that's why that game was relevant to you.
Yeah, one thing we have to be careful about, we know about OKC, but the difference between 3 and 8 in the Western Conference is 2 games. So you're talking about, man, the 4 to 5, with these matchups, the second round. Yes, we would have loved to seen OKC in that 7 spot, because what it brings to the playoffs. The reason why we think this year for Golden State was going to be their toughest year, toughest run to a championship, was because how in the 3 previous ones, they blew through the playoffs. Nick, it's well documented what their playoff record was, but if you could match them up with someone with the hatred, just the personal vendetta, KD, Russ, OKC, the crowd, the home court advantage that they have at OKC, because I believe that plays a big difference. The wear and tear, not only physically, but mentally, that it would have on Golden State. Like, I believe also that Golden State, it would get their full attention. If they get someone else in the first round, now we know they've been sleepwalking the last 10 or 15 games, but Russ and OKC, it would get the champs undivided attention, realizing that this is the first time that we could actually lose in the first round.
And so the point is, they are likely now probably going to get the Spurs or the Pelicans or Golden State in the first round. There's some other machinations, those most likely outcomes. And I think most people believe, even without Steph, Golden State with home court advantage, a rested Golden State would be heavy favorites against the Spurs or the Pelicans, especially with San Antonio now that we know Kawhi isn't coming back. But this is the most important playoff series this is the most important playoff series the Oklahoma City Thunder have played, I would argue, certainly since the Western Conference Finals against the Warriors. But you could make something of an argument since the NBA Finals against the Heat, because what it means, whomever they're playing, for the trajectory of this franchise, if they lose in the first round. They've got 47 wins. They got 47 wins last year. They got to the first round last year. If they have the same result this year as last year, and then all of a sudden players around the league, most notably Paul George, but all the other pending free agents in upcoming seasons, Klay Thompson a year from now, Boogie Cousins this offseason, whomever it is, say, well, maybe the method of Russ being the best player on a team just isn't going to be a successful one. That it's got a very high floor, but also a low ceiling. And what that means, Russ is relevant and will always be relevant in this league as an individual star. but will the Thunder continue to be relevant past this year? We felt like they got the most out of their season last year with Russ and the assorted parts with 47 wins. If they get 48, when you bring in an all-NBA guy in Paul George, forget the mellow part of it. Like, it would be wildly disappointing, and that's potentially what they're staring at.
Yeah, and if you're Russell Westbrook, to put it even further under the microscope, this is your career, basically, this postseason. Because if they flame out in the first round, chances are, and look, nothing is set in stone, but chances are that Paul George walks at the end of the year. And then what do you have? Remember, it's not like Oklahoma City can take the money that Paul George leaves and go sign DeMarcus Cousins or whoever it is. They're kind of locked in with some of their salaries there.
Yeah, it's not equal dollars.
It's not, but if you're Russell Westbrook, this postseason could mean the difference between adding on to a team that's a championship contender and competing for titles for the next 5 years for the prime of your career, or competing for a playoff spot for the rest of your career. You can't understate the importance, the magnitude of this postseason on the future of Russell Westbrook as an individual.
Especially when you consider he's locked in there.
He's locked in. That's what I'm saying. Like, he's not going to go. And look, one thing I can say this about, you know, Russell Westbrook and Oklahoma City have a great relationship. So if it's not going well in year 2 and year 3, and Russell's like, you know, maybe trading me is the best for both things, I can see them moving Russell Westbrook at some point. But for him in Oklahoma City, this is it. This right here, this postseason is going to determine how his career plays out in OKC.
You keep talking about how hot this team could be, how good this team can be, how dangerous this team is among the bottom 3 or 4 in the West. What do you consider a success for them yet? With who they added this offseason, with the way they played all offseason, it can't just be a first-round win. I mean, how far do they have to go for you to say, okay, they did right by all the pieces they put in here?
I mean, look, I think it's got to be at least second round, and the second round's got to be a dogfight. You've got to at least put up a fight against Golden State or Houston to make people believe that team, with maybe a tweak or two here, bring Roberson back next year, something makes them make that jump into that conference finals territory. I don't know if they necessarily have to beat Houston or Golden State, but take it far. Fight with them. Yeah.
Something that would supersede that, even a failure in the playoffs. If they were able to convince Paul George to come back, the rest of that wouldn't even matter.
I think, Chris, I think Paul George wants to come back. I do believe he wants to. You got to give him a reason. I believe he wants to.
Right, but I just believe his ability, their ability to retain him. I believe that would send a good message. And what about potentially getting Boogie Cousins to come there? Because I got to get off of Melo, man.
Well, you got to get off of Melo, but because they've locked up Steven Adams, it's such a, you would have to, it would, okay. The Boogie thing probably doesn't work because you've locked up Steven Adams. The Paul George thing, though, if you have Russ and Paul George, you will be able to find someone else that wants to come there, even if Boogie isn't the actual name, the guy we're talking about there. Something I didn't know about Paul George is Paul George is like a guy that's into going fishing. Not a big city guy, necessarily. Not a nightlife guy.
Yeah.
Like,
if you follow him when he was with the Pacers, a lot of his Instagram, a lot of his pictures were contrary to what people say about him and some of the other stuff he was involved in. In his downtime, he does like to fish. That's why people were a little surprised that he left Indiana in the way that he left.
He told me he found a golf course in Oklahoma City and he fishes with like a bunch of old white guys like all the time on that.
That's his life.
That's just what he does. That's why
not a lot of black guys at the country club.
Probably not like this. But like that's what I'm saying. Like, it's one thing for Paul George to say, I want to leave Indiana and go to the Lakers when you're playing for a go-nowhere Indiana team with no future. If Oklahoma City shows a future, that's what I'm talking about with that second-round dogfight. If they show they can compete for championships over the next 5 years, I think that could be just the push that Paul George needs to stay in Oklahoma City. But they get beat in the first round badly. I just don't see it.
Look, best largemouth bass fishing is always on a golf course. Really? I know that because I have rod and reels on my golf course in Florida.
He sets up a chair. He sets up a chair there.
Absolutely.
That's what he does.
Yes.
Best largemouth bass
on a golf course because the fertilizer that comes out of the grass gets into the water, and not a lot of people there fishing.
Okay.
Yeah, man. I know some things. I've been on this earth a while.
Learn something new.
I just want to say largemouth bass, so I could say it one time on the show in the course of my entire contract.
Now, Jenna somehow work that into
no doubt.
Being inappropriate or something like that.
Largemouth bass.
Coming up, it's Pat Riley recruiting LeBron to Miami.
Don't go anywhere, Chris. Stay with us.
That's next on First Thing.